Why is this one $60 but this one's $200? These all look the same. Which one do I really need? Can I use 2 USB microphones with my computer? What's an audio interface? Condenser? Dynamic? Wait a minute. I'm an audio engineer. I can figure this out.
Which microphone will you choose? Will you choose?
You've decided to launch your podcast. How exciting. You're all ready to go, and then you're hit with the first big roadblock. Which microphone do you choose? You are not alone in this shopping frustration. In fact, the gear that podcasters choose is the very thing that can hold them back from podcasting to begin with, or they buy really nice gear, but they don't know how to get a good sound out of the microphone that they purchase. But don't worry, by the end of this quick video, you will be able to make a confident decision on which microphone is best for your specific situation. Divide this video into really 3 different podcaster types, or you could say avatars. The first is what we like to call the remote interviewer. This is a solo podcaster who interviews guests remotely using a solution like Riverside FM or Descript. The second type we call the solo caster streamer. This is the solo podcaster who likes to live stream their podcast and interact with an audience live, as well as incorporate multiple camera angles or graphics and some bells and whistles on their live streams. And the third type or avatar is the co-host setup. This is a host-co-host setup where 2 people are recording in the same room. So whichever one of these 3 podcasting types that you most closely relate to, we will really be able to pinpoint an exact gear recommendation for you. And this is another reason why choosing your gear can be such a hurdle, because depending on which type of podcaster you are or what kind of show you want to produce, the type of gear that you would buy is going to be very different. So let's hop right into our recommendations, but I don't want you to make a purchase based off of a microphone that I recommend to you. I'd rather see you make a purchase based off of an understanding and a comprehension of mic basics. Not only will that help you to make a better purchase decision, but it will also help you to get better recordings from whichever mic you choose. Now, the first big decision that you're going to encounter that may likely hurt your brain is whether or not to use a traditional XLR microphone with an audio interface or to go with using a USB microphone, and what the difference is between those two. I would say for most podcasters, we can get away with using USB microphones, and they are emerging as the more popular choice because of their ease of use and also their incredible sound quality. So that's where we're going to spend most of this video, is talking about USB microphones, but at the end of the video, when we get into the co-host setup, we will touch on an audio interface and traditional XLR microphones as well. So let me introduce you to top contenders for USB podcast microphones.
Hey, I'm Samson Q2U.
And I'm the Rode USB PodMic.
Step aside, ladies. The Shure MV7 has arrived. I think we all know who's the best here, the most expensive, and the one with the flashy lights.
Yo, are you calling me cheap?
Alright, calm down, guys. Save it for the showdown. And first, let's let our viewers know what the big deal with USB microphones is.
Well, it's easy to understand what USB microphones are, but for that, you'll have to look at our bottoms.
Our undercarriage.
Our backside.
Come on, we know you want to.
Every USB microphone has an audio interface built into it. Looking at the bottoms of all 3 of these USB microphones, you will see an XLR output, a USB output jack, and also a headphone output jack. And there's a way on all 3 of these microphones to adjust the volume of the headphones. The XLR output is the output with the 3 prongs, and that will work with an XLR cable or a mic cable. When you plug an XLR or mic cable into any one of these microphones, it will actually bypass the preamp and the audio interface that is built into this microphone. If you plug these microphones into your computer via USB, they will automatically take over as your audio input and output, and you can adjust those settings in your system settings. This is where you will also find your input volume or the gain for some of your USB microphones. There is an app that works with all Rode microphones called Rode Central that will allow you to really fine-tune and get an even better performance out of your Rode microphone. Shure also has an app that you can use with the MV7 that will allow you to fine-tune the sound of your microphone even more. Well, this is some good information to have, and I hope that it clarifies things for you. And I know you're probably just wanting me to suggest or tell you one option for you to use. And in truth, which microphone you choose really doesn't matter because of the other components or the other elements that make up a podcast voice. So we gotta take a pause right now and talk about what makes up a podcast voice. What about in those videos where you might be using a shotgun microphone and actually have the microphone off camera? Would that be a podcast setup? Or would that create characteristics and more of what you're used to hearing in television or movies with dialogue? And then of course there's the classic studio mic setup, which is a condenser microphone often used with a pop filter. And this is more of your classic singer setup or even your voiceover artist. When you are hearing a professional podcast voice from your favorite podcaster, what is it that goes into making the voice sound like that? And it's really a combination of 5 main components or things that contribute to that podcast voice. The first is obviously the microphone. But the second is something called the proximity effect. It's not just that we're using a classic podcast microphone that looks like a podcast microphone. It's also that when we use podcast or broadcast microphones, we tend to be very close to the microphones. And this close proximity creates what they call the proximity effect, which actually emphasizes our low tones and makes us sound like that classic DJ voice. So perhaps that's why it's the podcast mic itself that really clues us into that's the type of content that we're consuming. It's not just that because in video podcasts, for example, that we see the podcast microphone in frame on the camera with the person speaking, but it's also because they're so close to the microphone. That really does create and lend its own characteristic to the sound of what makes the classic podcast voice. If you were to take a podcast microphone and have it too far away from your mouth, you're not going to achieve that classic podcast voice sound. Now, the other 3 elements are typically achieved in post-production, and they are compression. Compression is an effect or a plugin, and what it does is squeeze your voice together by making what's loud softer and what's soft louder, or reducing the dynamic range. And that adds its own characteristics, and we're very used to hearing our podcast and broadcast voices with compression on them. The other element that you will always hear on every professional podcast voice is a little bit of EQ. EQ is another plugin or effect that allows us to boost and reduce certain frequencies in the EQ spectrum, like the lows, the mids, and the highs. Another popular effect that we could maybe lump into this EQ category is de-essing. And just like it sounds, de-essing will reduce sibilance from our podcast voice, making it more pleasant on the ears. And finally, the last element, especially in today's world, that you will always hear on every podcast voice is a little bit of noise reduction. Again, there are tons of digital plugins that are so impressive that we can instantly, with one button, put onto our audio track after we've recorded it to reduce all of that noise. The reason that I wanted to pause and talk about this is because this perhaps is why people become so frustrated when they buy these really nice podcast microphones, they plug them into their computer, and they don't understand why their voices still sound like crap. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about our 3 different avatars and how these USB microphones would fit into your production and which one you would want to choose. And really, this comes down to a few different considerations. The first one is budget. Are you on a really tight budget? You want to just get started with something right off the bat. You have plans to upgrade your show later, but right now you got to start with where you're at. If that's the case, in every scenario, you're going to want to go with the Samson Q2U. It's an amazing mic. Now, perhaps it doesn't look quite like a podcast mic. It looks a little more like a handheld stage microphone, but it gets a really great sound for its very affordable price. You can pick up one of these for around $70 US, and of course, I will be leaving the link for all of this fun equipment in the description of this video. Now, if price isn't a concern and you're really just going for looks, then with the USB microphone, I would say the Shure MV7 takes the cake. Shure just has such a classic podcast look to their microphones and is really the most popular choice for most podcasters. However, if you're looking for ease of use and you don't plan on hiring an editor and you really want to do all of the editing yourself, then the Rode USB PodMic is the real winner for most cases. And that's because you can use the Rode with the Rode Central app in your computer, and that actually has all of those plugins I just mentioned baked into the microphone, which means before you even record the microphone, or even the signal of this microphone that gets sent to a Zoom meeting, for example, it will already have those 3 effects on it: compression, EQ, and some noise reduction, which is great. It cuts out all the times where you're not speaking, it cleans up your voice, and it does a pretty killer job. And also using the Rode Central app, you can tweak the settings a little bit and get it just how you like. This is why this microphone has really become a workhorse for me, and I'm using it more and more often than any other microphone that you see here on the table. And that's because in the world of podcasting and content creation, we make a lot of content. We're pumping out an episode every single week, maybe short videos, maybe YouTube videos. But because I'm constantly making educational content, I'm getting on meetings and virtual meetings with students, this microphone has really just become all I use. And it's because I was able to dial in my compression and EQ and noise reduction settings, and then I never have to do that processing stage for my audio. But then it also does have the flexibility when I'm working with an editor to turn off the processing on this microphone, because if you're working with an editor, your editor will likely say, hey, could you please turn off all those auto effects you're using? I can do a better job with my plugins. So if you're a solo podcaster and you're going to be interviewing guests remotely, any one of these microphones are going to be great. What you're really concerned with is looks. As long as you're close to the microphone and you learn how to apply a compressor and an EQ and noise reduction to any one of your microphones or work with an editor, you're going to be fine. So how the microphone looks and makes you feel is really your main consideration there. If, on the other hand, you are a solo podcaster who intends on streaming, then the Rode USB PodMic is the real winner, because it will actually add those processing effects to your voice and make you sound like a podcaster directly to your live stream, making editing way easier or even unnecessary, which is why some people prefer a live show so that they can avoid the editing. But then this brings us to that third avatar, that third podcasting type, which is the co-host setup. What do we do in that setup if we want to use two different USB microphones? Should I get two of the same USB microphones? Can I even plug two USB microphones into my computer? And this is where things get a little more complicated, because you're not just recording one audio track. Now you're recording two audio tracks, or even 3 or 4 audio tracks if you want to do a roundtable podcast. But the good news is you can use as many USB microphones with your computer as you want. You can get a USB hub and use 10 of them. And all you have to do is to create an aggregate device. And I do have a video here on our channel where I show you exactly how to do that, but it's really easy. You just go into your system settings and you set up a new device that contains both of the USB microphones. And then wherever you're recording your audio in a digital audio workstation or OBS studio, you'll be able to record each of those microphones separately on their own track, which is very important. And because this co-host setup is much more complicated, here I highly recommend that you get some advice from a podcasting coach. We do work with clients one-on-one, and you can also find out more about that by going to podsoundschool.com. But there are so many great coaches that can look at your specific situation, maybe hop on a FaceTime call with you, look at where you intend to record so that you can choose the right equipment and so that you understand what really goes into recording your audio and getting good levels so that you can send that to an editor, or if you're stuck on the idea of editing, so that you can edit yourself, at least to begin with. But eventually you've got to be working with an editor on your show. The benefits are just too great. As I mentioned at the first of the video, this is where we would talk about audio interfaces. And really, that's the only place I'm recommending audio interfaces much anymore to most people. And that's when you are wanting to record more than one microphone at the same time. If you're only ever going to be recording one voice, then a USB microphone is truly all you ever need in today's content creation world. But when you get into needing to record more than one voice, you'll need an audio interface which gives you different inputs. My go-to and favorite audio interface is the SSL2 Plus, and I recommend it to everyone. It has 2 inputs. There's also the SSL2, which just has 1 headphone output. The 2 Plus gives you 2 headphone outputs, which is really nice for you and your co-host. This gets really incredible audio, especially compared to the Scarlett 2i2 or any of the other consumer popular audio interfaces that you see on Amazon. We've compared a lot of them. This one takes the cake. But what an audio interface allows you to do is actually get a much higher audio recording with your microphones than the audio interface that is built into each of your USB microphones. But in order to really hear that difference, you need to start getting into the higher end, more professional audio interfaces. The consumer audio interfaces like the Scarlett 2i2 are really not much better than the audio interface that's in these USB microphones. But with an audio interface and using traditional XLR microphones, these are our top XLR microphone picks. Of course, the classic, world famous Shure SM7B. If you really just want to get the most famous podcasting setup, go with this one and get the SSL2 Plus audio interface. You won't need to buy any extra gadgets like a cloud lifter or anything to go with this microphone when you're using the SSL2 audio interface. Next up on the list, I'm a huge fan of the ElectroVoice RE-20. And then finally, the PodMic itself. Yes, the PodMic is an XLR microphone that is not USB, that's meant only to work with audio interfaces, and it goes for only $100. And when you compare this microphone to the $450 ElectroVoice, it's amazing how good this little guy is. And hey, he looks like a podcast microphone too. Aesthetically, pretty pleasing. If you really want to hear the difference between these 3 dynamic microphones and see how this $100 PodMic compares to the $450 ElectroVoice RE-20, check out this video right here where I do a blind taste test and you can actually listen to see if you can guess which is which and really decide which is right for you if sound quality is your primary concern.
Or a Samson Q2U.